Welcome in to another edition of the Mainly Hoops Best Bets episode. Um, we had another exciting weekend of games, and we have a bunch of good games here over the next couple of days. With tonight, Monday night, not a huge slate of games. We do have Iowa State playing at Arizona, Michigan playing Penn State, but not a lot of high-profile games. We do have some action to give out to you guys here for the next couple of days, um, that being Tuesday and Wednesday, with a total of 6 bets and then a few leans for you guys if you're seeking out more action. Um, we'll jump right into it, starting with tomorrow's slate. We have Georgetown hosting St. John's. Played them a couple of weeks ago. I believe this was also a play we gave out in that game. Georgetown covered, I think, 9.5 or 10 in that one. This one, they're coming in plus 4.5 against St. John's. They lost by 5 on the road last time. But Georgetown, playing good basketball. They did lose over the weekend to Providence, but a nice bounce back spot here at home for them against the St. John's team, who's probably at their peak of where they're going to be ranked.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely are. I think they've been a bit fortunate to have won the games that they've won. Look at the game on I believe that was last Wednesday against Xavier, where they were down 15 and ended up still covering the 8 somehow in overtime. We were on that as well. I've faded the St. John's team quite a bit, and I think the reads have been in the right spot. So I think we're going to go back to it again here, and it's mostly a fade of the St. John's offense that I just don't think has looked very good, especially without Davon Smith not being able to have that extra creator on the floor or even shooter. Like Davon Smith is one of the better shooters on this roster, which is a bit of a sad thing to say. And now that they don't have him, like it makes it even worse. They have to rely on, Aaron Scott and RJ Lewis, Simeon Wilcher to hit shots. And it's just like not that great of a proposition. Yeah, like I said, they've been getting away with playing extremely poor first halves. And in the game against Georgetown, they were down 10 at halftime and, went on a big run because Georgetown dealt with injuries in that game. And they've been dealing with injuries the last 5 or 6 games. That's why they're kind of on a bit of a slide right now. They've lost 5 of 6. But Jaden Epps only played 10 minutes in that game. And Sorber missed a lot of the second half in that game with a hyperextended elbow there. He missed, I believe, 8 of the last 9 minutes in that game. And that was where St. John's really made their run and ended up winning that game by 5. But I do like how Georgetown matches up on the defensive end with St. John's offense. Like St. John's doesn't shoot it well, so they kind of have to rely on their interior offense. But Georgetown, they're 5th in the country in 2-point field goal percentage defense, and that's going to go a super long way against this team, especially like I said, they don't have Davon Smith, like Kadari Richmond. There's not going to be a ton of gaps for him to drive and score at the rim, and you're going to have Thomas Sorber sitting there at the rim to, deny all those shots that get in there. So, and I like the athleticism of this front court in general for Georgetown with PV and Fielder plus Sorber. And overall, I just think this line's inflated. Like we said, I think this is a pretty good buy low, sell high spot with Georgetown losing 5 of 6 and dealing with all those injuries. And 3 of those losses, can't really fault them. They lost by 8 at Marquette, lost by 8 at home against UConn, which is probably the worst loss of the group. Because I don't even really think this Providence game, last game, is that bad of a loss. It's just a really bad situational spot for them. That's the most hostile environment they're going to play in all year long with that whole Ed Cooley situation that went down a couple of years ago. So, yeah, mostly a buy low, sell high spot here. This is implying that Georgetown would be getting 11.5 at St. John's. I just don't really think that would be an appropriate number. It was just 9.5. And I think Georgetown, they were the better team for a large portion of that game. So I'll gladly take 4.5. I actually do think they win this game outright, but I think I'd play this game down to plus 2.5 to plus 3.
Yeah. No, I think that's the side. I feel like St. John's luck is going to run out here at some point. But side note on St. John's, I saw Bleacher Report posted the updated AP poll today, and the cover photo was a picture of Cooper Flagg and Simeon Wilcher. And that didn't really seem to fit. I know St. John's is as high as they've been in a long time, but I'm not sure about Wilcher being the guy there.
Yeah, I don't think that's the picture. I don't really know who it is. Maybe it's RJ Lewis. I mean, he's probably been the best offensive player for them this year. He's played really well, above my expectation, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Another game tomorrow. We have BYU at home against Baylor. They're minus 3.5 in this game.
Yeah, I was planning on fading Baylor for both games of this mountain trip just because their depth just isn't there right now, especially without Jeremy Roach, who's dealing with his second concussion of the year. So I don't really expect him to play in this game either. It happened last Sunday. Typically when you deal with that second concussion, you're usually out for a little bit longer. It's usually a week and a half to 2 weeks. So, and Langston Love's still out with his ankle injury. I think that injury is a bit worse than they're playing it off as. He hasn't played in a while and came back for 3 or 4 games this year and just didn't look right. I don't really expect him to play in this game either, although he's had a questionable tag in every single game. But the second leg of the Utah trip is typically a bad spot for any team, and especially for Baylor. Like I said, they're playing a tight 7-man rotation right now, and it's basically 5 guys, and they're taking guys out when they get super tired. And in this situation, playing an elevation, it's not going to be well. I mean, I'm not going to say it's not going to be pretty, but I mean they passed the first test at Utah, but Utah is just a team that's in a really bad spot right now. I did bet Utah. I talked about that on the Saturday Best Bets show and thought it was a good spot for them, but they kind of just proved that they're a really bad team. They missed a bunch of free throws in that game, which kind of led to the cover for Baylor, but they couldn't stay in front of their man. And I think BYU can do a bit of a better job on the defensive end. And yeah, like I said, Baylor's going to have tired legs against a BYU team they're trending upward right now. Their shot making has been really good, especially in their game against Cincinnati on Saturday, where they went, I believe, 15 of 24 from 3, and they have a bunch of shooters that can get hot at any time. You know, guys like Trevin Knell, Dallin Hall, Richie Saunders, and Baker can all hit spot up threes against a Baylor defense that's probably going to play some zone in this game. I don't think it's a great idea for them to play a lot of zone, but they might have to in stretches with the tired legs. I don't think they're going to be able to play man to man for all 40 minutes here. And BYU on the defensive side, they can also keep Baylor off the glass, who they create a lot of their value, especially lately on the offensive glass. They did a nice job against Utah, but BYU, they're second nationally in defensive rebound rate. So I don't expect them to, really get hounded on the glass against Omier and Ojonwuna. So I think it's a pretty good spot. I think mostly just the fact that they're playing an elevation for the second time is definitely the biggest factor. And I'd play BYU up to -4 here.
Yeah. Baylor looked good on Saturday. That game was never really that close, but now you have a couple days off. You're playing again out there in Utah. Probably a tough spot here. So I think that's definitely the side to be on. For those of you that like MAC basketball, tomorrow night we have our first MACtion play of the year. Toledo plus 3.5 at Ohio.
Yeah, and this is my first MACtion bet of the year, but could very well be my last. But it's mostly a bet on the injury report for Ohio right now. They're in a really bad spot. Their front court didn't play last game in their win over Kent State, and they really only won that game over Kent State because they shot 3 for 19 from 3, and Ohio is one of the worst 3-point defenses in the entire country. They give up a ton of open threes, and they don't guard the ones that they get a hand up on very well. So a bit of an aberration there that Kent State went 3 for 19. And I think Toledo can kind of expose them in that area this time around. And I know for sure that Aiden Hadaway is going to be out for Ohio. And it looks like AJ Clayton, who's probably their best player, is doubtful here. Aiden Hadaway was in riding on a scooter last game. So I don't really expect him to go in this one. That was on Saturday. So yeah, definitely don't expect him to go. And the front court after that it's not all that great, especially offensively. Like, these two guys create a lot of value for this Ohio team on the offensive side, and it really drops off a ton. They gave up a 50% offensive rebound rate to Kent State on Saturday, and so Ohio, they're going to kind of have to create their value defensively by turning over Toledo. And Toledo, they're a top 25 nationally rated team in turnover rate on offense. So I don't really expect them to do all that much in that area. And on the defensive side for Toledo, it's not pretty, honestly. They're outside of the top 300 defensively in the country, but I don't really think they're going to get exposed with Ohio's front court missing in this game. Ohio's going to have to rely on their 3-point shooting a bit more, and I think Toledo is a bit better suited to defend that. So I do think Ohio's injuries catch up to them here in the second game, missing Clayton and Hadaway. So I expect Toledo to win this game on the road, and I'd bet this down to 2 or 2.5. It's sitting at 3.5 right now.
Yeah. Maction, always a fun place to be, fun place to find yourself on a Tuesday or Friday night. Now tomorrow, I know we also have some leans. Wake Forest, San Jose State, and Gonzaga.
Yeah, Wake Forest, it's mostly a fade of Louisville. They have to be at the peak of their market at this point. They're shooting the lights out after going 12 to 14 games of really not making any shots. And I don't really think this team has really great shot makers outside of Rain Smith, and Hepburn's a decent shooter. He's not like a guy who can light it up for 40% for a whole year. So, and I'm super high on this Wake team. I still think they're pretty undervalued analytically at this point. They're coming off a loss, albeit it was to Duke, and it was a really tough effort in a game that they honestly could have won. They went on a massive run in the second half. I believe it was like a 24-5 run at one point in that game. So they've showed that their defense can play up, and on the road, I like a team that's a little bit more defensive minded. So I was hoping I'd get a bigger number here. Torvik had it at 10.5, I believe, or 11, but it opened at 8.5, and I've seen some 7.5 and 8s out there right now. So probably not going to end up touching this, but that's definitely the side I'd be on.
Yeah, no, I think that seems to be the side, just fading Louisville. I'm not really a believer in Louisville still. But obviously they've continued to play well for an extended stretch now. So props to them. But I think Wake Forest is kind of hitting I know they lost Saturday, but I feel like they're hitting their stride a little bit. Playing good basketball. They competed with Duke for pretty much the whole game until Duke pulled away at the end. The next game, this is a team I feel like you've been on a few times, San Jose State as a dog, playing at San Diego State tomorrow.
Yeah, and this is mostly a fade of San Diego State, who I've liked to fade in these spots just because their offense isn't really all that great. They rate outside the top 100 in KenPom and Torvik's offensive efficiency metrics. So it's a pretty good proposition to fade those kind of teams laying big numbers. And San Jose State has been feisty, and they have really good guard play, and they can hold their own on the glass in this game. I think Tim Miles is a good coach, especially as a dog, and it's going to be a slower pace game here. And yeah, like I said, I trust the backcourt of McClendon, Aduje, and Donovan Yap to really hold their own against the San Diego State backcourt that isn't all that great offensively. So that's the way I would lean. You might see me place this, or might add it on the Discord. So make sure to join that if you haven't already. And definitely make sure to join that, because you're not gonna see it anywhere else besides on the Discord if I add it late. And if it goes up to like 15.5 or 16, I'll probably certainly be on it. So make sure to join that.
Yeah. Then the last one, last lean for Tuesday, Gonzaga, minus 13.5 against Oregon State, a team who just beat them 2 weeks ago at Oregon State in overtime.
Yeah, mostly just a pure revenge spot here. And Gonzaga's kind of tinkering with how to figure out their defense. They started Emmanuel Innocenti in their last game. I believe that was on Saturday against Portland. I mean, they beat the crap out of Portland. They're probably the worst team in the WCC. So I can't really put a lot of stock into it. They beat them by 43, I believe. And they didn't start Ike either. Ike only played 16 minutes, and they elected to go with Braden Huff. And they're just trying to find more of a defensive lineup. Like, obviously we know that's been their problem throughout the entire year. Oregon State is a really good interior offense, so that's ultimately why I'm not touching this game. But for them to go on the road and keep this game tight against an angry Gonzaga team that's coming off that loss against them, I really don't see them keeping it inside the number. but I don't know if they've completely solved their defensive issues just by throwing a solid perimeter defender out there in Innocenti.
Yeah, no, I think that if you're going to bet that game, probably the side to be on, just purely, Gonzaga revenge spot after that loss a couple weeks ago. I think that game was a little bit misleading, as obviously Gonzaga has their defensive issues, but I don't think Oregon State's that good. So that'd be the way to go, I think.
Yeah, if this number was a little bit shorter, like 10.5, I think if I got a 10.5, I would have been on it. I think a lot of projection sites had it 10.5, but we were never going to get that with the spot, like with the revenge angle there. They're always going to price that out. So definitely the side to lean at least, and I wouldn't be opposed to anybody betting it.
Yeah. Moving ahead to Wednesday, we got a few bets for you and one lean. First one, Maryland -4 against Wisconsin.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we're going to get 4 here or not. Like Wisconsin might be a little bit overvalued on, KenPom and Torvik at the moment. I believe they're actually rated as a better team right now over Maryland, but I would disagree with that. I think Wisconsin, they're definitely at the top of their market right now, and I'm pretty sold on this Maryland team overall. And like Wisconsin, they're 32 of 67 from 3 in their last 2 games against Nebraska and UCLA, in a game that they lost against UCLA and shot 50% from 3. So it kind of just shows where their defense is at right now, and you can kind of poke holes in their recent resume at the moment. Like their best win since New Year's is against Ohio State at home by 2, and we've seen them have defensive issues throughout this season, but they haven't really got exposed since the new year came around. Like they played a Rutgers team that was dealing with norovirus, like Minnesota, USC, and Nebraska, who's just a horrific offensive team at this point, and that you can't really be scared of those teams. And I think their analytical profile has been a bit boosted by these pretty bad offenses that they've played. And I think Derek Queen and Julian Reese can have a ton of success in the post-up game, and even dragging out the bigs of Wisconsin's bigs, Winter and Crowell, out to the perimeter, and they can drive against them and create some value. And I don't think Wisconsin has anybody to guard Jacoby Gillespie either, and he's been unbelievable in conference play. He's been one of the best guards in the entire league. So I really do like this spot for Maryland, they're typically way better at home, despite them winning their last 2 road games over Illinois, who they blew out, and then coming off that, wouldn't call it a miracle win against Indiana, but they ended up pulling it off with a late game 3. And like I said, Wisconsin's showing a lot of holes against quality teams. So in this spot, I would lay up to 5 or 5.5 with the Terps.
Yeah. Next one, we got Northern Iowa +7 against Drake.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what line we're going to get here. I don't know if the market's starting to sniff out that Drake's not all that great against the number when they have to lay a decent size number. They're 3-8 on the season against the spread when laying 7 or more. And they've actually lost a couple of these games outright. And I think Northern Iowa, they profile as a team that can hang in this game. They take care of the ball at a high level. Drake creates a lot of their defensive value by turning teams over, and they're really good and Drake's really good on the offensive glass as well. But Northern Iowa is one of the better defensive rebound teams in the entire country with that pack line style, and they can really force Drake to take outside shots. And they're not all that great of a shooting team outside of Mascari. So I think Northern Iowa's in a pretty good spot as the more talented offense, and I think they match up pretty well defensively here. And the pace of this game is going to be extremely slow. I wouldn't be surprised if this game was played at 55 to 56 possessions, and that's only going to favor the dog here. And Drake is last in the country in adjusted pace at 364th, and they play like 58 possessions a game, which is crazy. And UNI is 304th in adjusted pace. So this game is not going to be a track meet at all. I really don't mind a sprinkle on the money line here, just because there's not going to be a ton of possessions, and Northern Iowa can shoot their way to a win easily. Plus the fact that I think they actually match up pretty well. I'd play this down to +6 though, because I do think Drake is definitely the better team. They've proven that against quality competition this year. but they just don't really profile as a team that can win by margin with their defense first team, and the offense is still sort of a work in progress and it's mostly just a lack of talent on that side outside of like Bennett Sturts and Muscari.
Yeah. Drake has definitely shown their issues after their hot start, starting undefeated. They beat Vanderbilt, right?
In the championship at Charleston. Yeah.
So I mean that win is aging very well, but they've really slipped here as they've gone through conference play.
And they've lost a couple games outright as like pretty significant favorites. I believe they lost to UIC, and they lost another game, and they just got taken to overtime by probably the worst team in the league in Missouri State. They were laying 8 in that game, and I believe they ended up winning by 7 in overtime. But they're vulnerable to these types of games and playing extremely close games with the pace that they play.
Yeah. And the last play for Wednesday, Loyola Chicago +10 against George Mason, led by Cody Johnson, our boy, formerly of Auburn.
I don't know if they're led by Cody Johnson, but
they're definitely
I think
not.
they have some really good players on this team, and the defense is actually ridiculous. It's actually one of the better defenses in the entire country. I think they're sitting at like 16th nationally in defensive efficiency on Torvik right now. It's pretty ridiculous.
But,
I think.
Hey, Cody Johnson has led them in assists in 2 straight games, so pretty big.
That's a good sign. Has he led them in turnovers too, or no?
Probably.
Yeah, probably. But I mean, that's actually part of the issue with George Mason is their guard play, and they do turn the ball over a ton. And I think Loyola can kind of expose them in that area. They're 82nd nationally in defensive turnover rate, and George Mason, they're outside of the top 300 on the offensive side. So, but overall, I think this is another buy low, sell high spot. That's kind of been the theme of this episode, and I think they match up pretty well also. And like George Mason's, I would assume they're at the top of their market right now. They're sitting at 60th on Torvik right now, and they've been playing really well. They've been playing well against quality competition, and they're another team just like Drake that profiles as a team that plays really well as a dog and a short favorite, but when they have to lay bigger numbers, they really struggle because of the lack of offense. They're 0-3 in conference right now, and they have to lay 7 or more. And Loyola Chicago is finally at full strength. They were missing Kamani Huinsu and Jaden Dawson for a good amount of this year when they went on that trip for the Diamond Head Classic in Hawaii. They were without those guys. They were without Justin Moore also, but he tore his ACL, so he's out for the year. But they looked pretty bad during that stretch, but it was mostly a lack of depth. And I think that number, like at 10, I mean, I'm seeing projections at 12.5. Like I really don't think we're going to get 12.5 here. I think there's a little bit more respect for Loyola in the market, but getting double digits, I think is definitely going to be an auto bet here for me. And Huinsu and Dawson are really important for the perimeter defense and for a defense that I think is undervalued for the Ramblers here at this point. And yeah, I just don't think George Mason has that breakaway speed, and they've shown that in conference. And taking double digits dogs in conference, I think is a pretty good proposition in general. And when you're getting an undervalued one in Loyola Chicago, I think it's a pretty good bet.
Yeah, not the same Loyola Chicago that we saw make the Final Four run in 2018, but still, a fun team to root for.
If they had Cam Krutwig, I think they'd be laying 10 in this game. I don't think they'd be giving 10.
Yeah. Wonder what he's up to now. Last play for Wednesday, or more of a lean. We have Ole Miss -5.5 against Texas. Texas coming off their 2 big wins last week. Probably just a sell spot on Texas after beating Missouri. And then on Saturday, Texas A&M at home after trailing by as many as I believe 18 in that game. Ole Miss coming off 3 straight losses now after taking down Alabama 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I think it's a really good spot for Ole Miss to get right, and it's going to be a really good motivational spot for them. They've in 2 of their last 3, like the game against Missouri, they were kind of out of for the most part. I thought it was a pretty bad matchup with Missouri's shooting ability to shoot over the top of that no middle defense, but I don't think Texas has the spot up shooting to beat this Ole Miss defense outside of like Trey Johnson, but he's not really playing off the ball that much. He's playing more in isolation and in pick and roll. And you have to monitor the health of Arthur Kaluma. I believe he sat out last game, right?
Yeah.
He might sit out again, and he's like a super important guy in the spot up game, being able to space out the opposing Ole Miss four-man and break field. So I don't know. I don't know if the number is great here at 5.5, but just because I kind of have my reserves on this Ole Miss team overall, but I've started to buy into them a bit more. And Texas, I think you're still getting decent numbers on this team just because of the competition they played early in conference play. It's the public perception on this team isn't great. And obviously they're coming off of that huge emotional win in a game that they should have lost against A&M, but made a huge comeback run. It was a bit of an emotional high. And I think, walking into Ole Miss off of that win, I just don't really think it's great.
Former coach too.
Former coach as well. Yeah.
So definitely a game that he's always going to have circled on his calendar now, especially with Texas and the SEC. So look for Ole Miss probably to bounce back there, unfortunately, coming out of the mouth of a Texas fan. But other than that, those are our plays. Those are our leans. There are a few other pretty good games to monitor that we don't have plays on. Kentucky trying to bounce back at Tennessee tomorrow. North Carolina traveling to Pittsburgh. We also have on Wednesday Alabama, Mississippi State. Alabama's really starting this gauntlet schedule right now where they got to play a ranked team, I think, for like 2 or 3 weeks straight. Granted, that is the SEC, but this is going to be a tough stretch for them. And then one game I think to really monitor will be St. Mary's at Santa Clara. St. Mary's was down at halftime on Saturday at Washington State, ended up having a big second half, won by 5 in that game. Nice emotional win on the road, but now here they are on the road again against a really good Santa Clara team. That line's projected around -1 for St. Mary's. So a lot of good games here over the next few days.
Yeah, with Gonzaga on deck as well. I believe they play them on Saturday. So I don't know if they'll be overlooking this game against Santa Clara just because Santa Clara is probably the third best team in this league at this point. If I was getting a better number, like if I could somehow get a 3.5 or a 4 on Santa Clara, I would be on Santa Clara. But at this point, I think they're a bit priced out just with their recent success.
Yeah, no.
It'll be a really fun game, though. It's going to be a game I'm watching.
Yeah, I do think that'll be a good one to watch for anyone out there that just wants to watch, or because I do think it could be a game that St. Mary's drops and lets Gonzaga back into the picture of winning the WCC.
Yeah, for sure. And then as for that Kentucky and Tennessee game, I don't even mind Kentucky on the money line. I'm probably not going to play it. It's not going to be like anything official, but their shot making can beat anybody in the country, and they might be able to shoot over the top of that Tennessee defense. And like we've talked about, they go as far as their shot making goes, and I think you could get around like a plus 300 to 350 range. So I don't really think that's a bad idea against a Tennessee team that just really doesn't have a ton of offense. Like they kept it close against Auburn, and their defense was unbelievable, but it's really hard to hold down this Kentucky offense that takes care of the ball and shoots it as well as they do.
Yeah, no, definitely. But should be a fun midweek here of games. Then we have some big games coming over the weekend that we'll be having another Best Bets episode coming out. We got UNC Duke on Saturday. So rivalry week there, then Gonzaga St. Mary's. So should be a fun week of games. Best of luck to everyone on their wagers, and we'll see you next time in our next Best Bets episode.